Hi guys, how's it going? So in this video, I will be covering a new concept about Figma, something that has been around for a while and is one of those most powerful tools in Figma when you're going to be creating something over and over again. I'm talking about components. So in the previous set of videos, we have been talking about how Figma has a lot of different tools to make product design easy, right? Components is another one of those. I will jump into components very quickly, but let me tell you why components are necessary. For instance, now think of it this way: when you are creating a simple user app like the linked app that we are creating. Now over here you have multiple different varieties of buttons that you might just want to create. So every button would have probably slightly different text, might have different colors in terms of how the representation is necessary and stuff like that. For instance, over here the sign up is also a button, sign in with Google is also a button, isn't it? Right? So both of these are buttons which have clickable interfaces. And that is why there are going to be a lot of different elements in the entire interface, in the entire design, which are going to be used very similarly over and over again. Probably might have slightly different functions, right? So that is where components is necessary. Just like styles, which can be defined at the start of the project once and can be reused again and again. And you know that the styles are dynamic as well, so that if you end up changing one aspect of the style, the entire design changes everywhere in the same project. Components work very similarly, and components are more to do with layers and a lot of larger aspects of the design itself rather than just for the color or the font of the text. Now I'm sure that you have been following the entire series all this while, but if you haven't, check out this link over here that will show you all of the previous videos where we have talked about text, we have talked about how the wireframe has been created. We created this wireframe in one of the previous videos as well. So make sure that you do that, and also learn that we have been creating a certification course on product design, something on UI and UX, and we have Figma in that. That's going to be quite useful in your product design journey. Now jumping back over here, let's see how components are and what components can be created. I remember that in one of the previous videos I had mentioned that we can create something like this, which is multiple buttons, and these buttons are slightly different style. You can see that these are also supposed to be buttons that you can tap and select or highlight and stuff like that, right? So let me quickly show you how we can do this over here. So creating components is quite easy. What you need to do is you need to create a very similar layer that you have already created and make a component out of it. Let's see how that happens. So let's say if I do have a component that I want to create, that is going to be a button. So here I have a text and a rectangle. The text goes inside, make this slightly darker, and there I have the button. Maybe the text could also be slightly larger in size. So let's just add to the medium one. Now select both of them, make it a frame by adding auto layout, and I will add some space around this button over here. So there I have it. I have a text, I have a layer, and the entire auto layout has been set with 40 things on the side. So it's okay whatever style you want to give it over here. The thing is, once this has been created, you can click on this button right over here, which is supposed to be going to be creating a component. When you create that, you see that this ends up changing from a usual blue frame into a purple frame, and this small nice icon that has popped up right over here and over here as well. Right, so this is the component button. Now let's see how we can use this button. I will create a new frame and add this component from over here. Okay, now I've gotten these two buttons over here. What if I was supposed to change the text in the button itself? So in the original component, I can change it to text, and then you see that this ends up changing by default. This would also happen if I was changing the color of the item over here, something like that. So that's blue, it's not visible, and that is why over here. We can see that how creating that component is useful because it will be able to reflect in multiple places. Now the good thing is, and this is the advancement of components, is that you can create multiple variants of the component itself. What does that mean? So let's say if I do have a blue one over here and I would want to create another version which is probably let's say purple with white text, we can do that. So if you select this component once over here, you see the button over here is now changed and it says add variant. So I click over here, you can see that another version has been created, and now this variant, you can see that there is something that has come over here. We'll quickly go about those properties, but just before that, let's change the color for this one. And let's say we pick yellow. Okay, so I have blue and I have yellow over here. And what about these? This, you can see that now these text buttons have not changed. Why? Because this is an instance of the first variant. So once I've selected this, I can go over here. It says some sort of button, and because that's a component, and this is property 1. And if I select variant 2, that is what ends up becoming this one. And let's say if I have the text longer over here, and so you see that how that has been created, and that is basically the variant 2. Now that's the idea, right? You can create multiple variations of that component, and whenever you're using the component, you can choose any of the variations that you'd want to go forward with. Now the thing is, with all of these different variants that you are creating, you can add in a lot more aspects to it. So let me show you how and what can be done about how these multiple variants can be created and how they can be utilized as well. So let's get started. Now, all of this was basically introduction. We are now in the meat of the content. Okay, so to get started with, let's just pick up a couple of buttons over here. I do see that there are 3 different variations of the buttons. So there is one login, there is one sign in with Google, and there is one for signups, right? So one with a purple background, one with a background and an icon, and something without an icon or just basically a text, right? So let's delete all of this. Let's start afresh. I will call this frame components. Now the first thing is, for something like this with sign in with Google or sign in with LinkedIn, I would want a fixed width, isn't it? So we can create a simple rectangle. I'd say somewhere around 350. 350, 50, 25. This is good. Remove this, add a stroke. Then we need to add in an icon over here from this. Now once these 3 things have been created, let's create an auto layout over here. Layout. Now in the frame, I do have 20 pixels over here on this side. Let's make it about 25 and want that to be limited, fixed width, and let's stick to 350. Now with all of this, everything has been centered, well and good. About 20 points over here, and this is supposed to be fixed height as well. So this does not matter. Okay, so there we have a simple button. Now this button has been created. Now one of the options is I create a replica of this and call this sign in with LinkedIn. And instead of Google, we have the LinkedIn icon. Now once I've created both of these buttons, I can select all of them and hit this option over here. But before that, click on the arrow, right, and say create component set. So once I do that, I can see that these have been components that have been created. Now there are properties over here that I can change and rename as well. So if you select one of these components, you can see on the right side there is a properties panel, and there is something called property, and there is a setting over here. Now what I can do is I can rename this property. I can call it variant, or I can call it app, right? And then maybe the first one I would want to call that as, this is the first one, this is the first one, I can call that as Google, and the other one will end up being called in as LinkedIn. Okay, great. So now when I have a particular asset that I'm going to be using in a new frame, I can choose to select which one of them, and I can choose that directly from over here. So I can choose LinkedIn or I can choose Google. Yeah. So that's basically the idea of how you can create multiple components, but the thing that we're going for is slightly better than this. Now, instead of creating all of these individually, and if let's say if I had about 5 different apps, would I end up recreating all of them? That will become slightly tiresome. So what we can do instead is have these also as components, have one of Google or one of the LinkedIn apps as individual components. So I do have these icons over here. You can select them, create a component set over here, right? And this component is probably called the apps. And one that I do have is called LinkedIn icon. Property 1 is also the logo. Actually, this one can be called logo. All of this is immaterial. This is not too complicated. So icon is supposed to be LinkedIn, and the other one is supposed to be Google, right? So now, instead of having a different variation for this one, what if I can do something slightly different? So just like how we had chosen Google over here, now instead of Google I can choose the component directly. So let's say I delete the LinkedIn one for instance, and instead of Google icon, I can just bring in the icon over here. When that happens, now I have created a simple icon, and this icon can now be changed if I want to. So it can become from LinkedIn, it can become to Google as well. Right? So that happens when I select those components. Now inside that component, you can see that the current way that has been used over here. I can create a replica of this and make it a slightly different one, but there is something that we can do slightly better. Now let me tell you about properties in components. When you're creating a component, you can have multiple properties that you can choose to change if necessary. For instance, choosing which of these icons between LinkedIn and Google is a property that has been created. How does it work? If we go to the logo, you'll be able to see that in the parent component there is something over here from which you'll be able to select the logo and which variant of the logo would you want to use. Right? You see this small button over here, create an instance swap property. Now this property or this button is basically selected or is available so that you can set this as a setting in the main component itself. So when I click that, something like this comes over here. I can add the logo buttons over here. So those are basically the preference icons that I would want to create, and let's call this app. So when I do select on Google over here, I'll be able to select which of these properties can I choose. If I remove this, see there is something over here and I can choose which of those properties can be selected. That's one thing, probably slightly complicated right now. We'll get to how this works out. And instead of calling this Google, can I just call this button with icon? Okay, yeah, so let's call this button with icon. Now in this over here as well, I'd want to create another variation in which I can change the text, isn't it? You might be thinking, if I'm creating something with Google over here, why do I have to call this button with icon? And I might have to create another variation which is LinkedIn. So if I select on this layer, if I go over here and select this property right over here, says text. Now the value that has been set up is sign in with, let's say, underscore, right? And now what has happened is when I am going to be using this, I will be able to select I will be able to change the text dynamically. So now I bring in the component from over here, assets. You can see that over here, now the component settings have slight different variations. So if I do select this text, there is an option to change the text directly from over here, LinkedIn. And when I'm using this, I probably would want to go inside the logo and change the up of button over here as well. Right? So a single component can now be reused in different form factors. So this is what has happened. This is the original variant, and we have multiple different options that I can choose over here. That we've made the text customizable. We've chosen the brand icon if it want to be there or not. We can do another thing. We can create another variation in which I do not have the brand icon at all. So if I go back to the component set of layers and I choose to go over here with logo, you can see that there is something for layer. So again, I can create a boolean property and let's say show logo. So the value over here is true. Now again, so let's see if I have the assets. You can see that another option on another property has been created, which is the boolean property. So I can turn it on or off. You can see that app, which is the button that I would want to choose. Currently we have created only one variation. We'll probably just create a couple of others. Then we have the text that we can choose. We can choose to show logo or not. Isn't that nice? So with a single component that we have created, we've created a couple of properties in it, and those properties will end up reflecting how the entire component works. Now let's go ahead and create another one. So currently it has one variant, so let's click on this button over here, or I could have clicked over here in the center as well to click on add variant. So once I do that, so this component has a lot of different spacing, so maybe I can just reduce the spacing over here. This has no need to be visible over here. Okay. So we'll come back to this. Now in the second variation, now this one I would probably want to create something like this, right? So purple color, purple in the fill, and the text can be then changed. So let's call this brand color. Okay, now over here all of these settings are probably already available. So brand color, I do have the app that can be selected. Now I would want to change the color right over here. So instead of stroke, this has to have a fill, and that fill is supposed to be from the brand purple that we had created last time. The text has to be changed, so the text can be white over here. From the brand color, the logo is something that I do not want over here, so I can just delete that layer directly from here. And then I do have this setting. I can see that this is the text setting that is already available, that has been set. So in component 1, I can create another variation now. So let's get this back over here. Now this one, the first one was of course the variant was button with icon. I can choose the other one, which is brand color, and then I can change the text again. There we go. Isn't that easy? So we have created two different variants. Probably the third variant would be something way more simpler, which is just a button and absolutely has nothing at all. So create another variation of this and call this no boundary, or maybe just text button. Okay, so here what I would need is remove the logo, change the text, remove the grid over here as well. So let's say I do remove the stroke, and the text button, probably the color would change and the size would change for this one. So let's keep it small, and where's the fill? The fill would be over here, and call it brand pink. So what we have done is we've created another variant. Now over here I have another variation, which is a text button that will end up looking something like this. And the thing is, for this one I might have to just change the settings for the width and the height. So I can just call it hug contents on both sides. Does not need any sort of auto layout, so we can remove the auto layout from over here as well, and that ends up creating a simple button. Did I lose out on something over here? Yeah, I think this is not necessary, so we can just push it back to 0. So finally what we have done is we have created another variation, and we have chosen those 3 different options. And now I can put it back over here. Now instead of replacing, instead of having multiple buttons over here, I can have somewhat more consistency. So let's do that. Let's bring in the first one over here. I would want this to be the brand color and says login. Maybe I can just delete this one right away. This sign up is currently added as a text. So what I can do is probably just bring in another button over here. Now this component is supposed to come right here. Both of this will have to end up becoming an auto layout and have to go one after the other. So there we go. The text sign up from here will have to disappear, and that's what we will do right over here. There we go. This component is supposed to be text button. So here's the frame, and now I will probably just bring all of these closer. The frame has a lot of gap right now, so maybe I can just push this back to 0. 10 point will help, and for this text I can end up changing the text new to linked, and this should be sign up. There we go. And similarly for this one as well, let's replace all of these buttons first. So where is this? Here is the frame that we want. Let's bring in the first one over here. Bring this over here. Okay. Now this component is supposed to replace the sign in button over here. So there it goes. And another version of this which will be for LinkedIn. So we need both of these. Now from this component, choose the logo. The logo will have to be done from over here. LinkedIn, sign in with LinkedIn. There we go. And for the other one, everything else looks okay. Component, sign in with Google. Okay, great. And lastly, for this bit, let's bring in another button over here. Both of these will have to be on a frame, one after the other. So this text does not need the sign up over here, and this component has to be just the text button, and it says sign up. There we go. Probably the spacing is way too high. I just make this slightly easier. So let me just bring it closer over here. There we go. Right, so this is basically how components work. So you have seen multiple variations of how components can be created and how those instances can be modified. A lot of different properties in these components are quite handy when you're creating different varieties or different variations without bulking too much on a lot of different variants. I hope you were able to catch everything that we have been talking about in this video. In the upcoming one, actually before we go back, I will give you one simple problem statement. So we have already seen how buttons have been created over here. Now what I would want you to do is create a button something like this. Not too difficult a task. What you need to do is have a button so that whenever you tap on it, the other option could be when the color changes to purple, and when it's not tapped, when it's not selected, it is in a default color. So go ahead, try this out. Now if you did not get that, put it back in the comments and tell me what was not easy for you, and I will be able to help you out based on that. Now in the upcoming video, we'll talk about how you can make more design stylizations choices when you are starting off directly, and from there we will see how content or how these designs are created to make the best UI that is possible. I will see you in the upcoming video. In the meantime, do not forget to like, share and subscribe if you like this channel and you want to continue learning from me.